you guys there? Okay, so I gotta get this video out, okay, because this is fucking ridiculous, okay? This is fucking nuts. This is unbelievable, okay? When I was a kid, alright? When I was a kid, I read this comic strip called Calvin and Hobbes, alright? It's probably the best comic strip ever written. But at the center of it all lies that question, okay? Is Hobbes real, or is he just a figment of Calvin's imagination? What's going on with him, alright? Now, Watterson himself gave a very evasive answer, basically saying that he doesn't want to give an answer one way or another, alright? So, you know, what that actually means is that he's too fucking stupid to figure it out, and he needs someone who's higher IQ, like me, to you know, take his own lore and chew it up and then vomit it back into his mouth like a baby bird, because I need to explain to him how his own shit works, okay? But I think I figured it out, okay? I think I found out what this is and how this all works, okay? So we're going to begin with a few basic observations, okay? First of all, Calvin is very creative, he's very imaginative, his imagination is extremely vivid, and in some cases, whether this is real or fake is unclear. Secondly, Calvin genuinely perceives Hobbes to be real, and this is never questioned. Furthermore, everyone who is not Calvin always perceives him to be fake, and this is never questioned. And thirdly, we see Hobbes' effects bleed out into the real world with no other explanation. And there's a few incidents of this that I'm going to show. First of all, there was the incident where Hobbes tied up Calvin far better than Calvin could have realistically tied himself up, and his parents saw this. Second of all, there's just all the times when Hobbes pounces on Calvin and Calvin gets injured, and his parents see this, right? And then there's also the time, the tie incident, where a guest was, you know, arriving at Calvin's house, and Hobbes shows up in a tie, okay? But the thing is, Calvin didn't even know anyone was coming until the last minute, so he would have had no way to put the tie on Hobbes. So the physical effects, I think, basically solidly disprove the fact that Hobbes is just, you know, a figment of Calvin's imagination. So I think we can safely conclude, and there's more evidence for this also, just based on the fact that Hobbes is always, you know, fucking disagreeing with Calvin. Whereas, you know, kids and their imaginary friends, Watterson himself has said this, just want people to, we would just want someone to agree with them on everything, right? So this pretty solidly disproves that Hobbes is just, you know, a figment of Calvin's imagination. So then, he's real. Okay. Why do other people not see him as real? I mean, what is he? What's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. He's a goddamn eldritch abomination, okay? He's not from this fucking universe. That's what's going on here. Alright, now we have 3 models to work with. One of them is pretty weak. I'm gonna go over that one first, just so you guys see my train of thought and see how I got to the answers that make more sense. And then we're going to go over the 2 answers that make a little bit more sense. So they're all pretty similar, though. So the first idea is that the plush tiger that everybody but Calvin sees, that's real. That's a real thing, but it has some sort of machinery within it that comes from another universe. The whole thing was probably created in some other universe for whatever purpose, who the fuck knows. But it was created from some other universe with laws of physics that are completely different from ours, or with technology that's just far more advanced than ours, such that we can't even perceive it, right? And this plush toy sort of creates in Calvin's mind the hallucination of a real tiger by physically influencing his perception. Now, I think this theory falls apart for 2 reasons. First of all, it doesn't take into account the very physical effects we see Hobbes has on the world. Second of all, it doesn't really make any fucking sense on any fundamental level, right? Consciousness is not epiphenomenal, okay? You do not have a soul. Who you are is just the physicality of your mind, okay? So if you're going to be able to manipulate someone's perception, which, you know, is more possible than you might think. Look up change blindness and all that shit. You know, the human mind does not pick up as much detail as you think it does. But anyway, if you were able to influence the perception of someone such that they saw something that wasn't actually there, you're altering the atoms in their brain, okay? You are physically changing something in this physical world. So if you're able to do that, then you would also just be able to, you know, physically enact changes on the world and, you know, touch things and move things. So we can modify this theory a tiny bit to get to the first of the plausible theories, which states basically that same exact thing. The plush toy is the real thing, Calvin is hallucinating, but this time the machinery also permits for physical manipulation of the world beyond just mental perceptive states. Now the third theory is basically that, but inverted. Okay, so it says that Hobbes is a physical, real thing, you know, walking around in our world, right? And the puppet is just a sort of, or the doll is just an illusion, okay? It's sort of like an alternate form that it makes other people see it as. It's almost like a reality anchor, like if you've read some SCP pages, okay? So that other people sort of like have some sort of anchoring of his physical location to make the reality overwrites easier for, like, it probably works with like with some sort of pathfinding algorithm that's incredibly complex, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But I think this theory is generally a little bit more plausible for various reasons. So, for one reason is the very first comic strip ever, okay, where Calvin catches Hobbes in a tiger trap. Now, this implies that Hobbes is a discrete, conscious entity that exists independently of Calvin. So this means that he's manipulating the perception in a kind of like area of effect of everyone that sees him, except Calvin. Calvin sees the real deal. Furthermore, more evidence just generally that Hobbes isn't of this world is a strip which I'm going to show, which shows that he isn't even a real fucking tiger, okay? He's just masquerading as one. So from these models, from these answers, we get more questions, like, why is Hobbes doing this? And my answer is that I don't think he knows that he's doing this. I don't think it's like an ability that he is consciously aware that he has. I think it's more just like an inherent biological ability, just something that automatically happens. And so whatever it is, whatever Hobbes is, there was a clear intent, whether he was created or whether he evolved, to avoid detection, to avoid being perceived by any conscious entity in whatever world he traverses. And so, of course, we have to answer then why can Calvin see the truth? And I think this is for two reasons. One of them more stronger than the other, but both at play. The first reason is that Calvin, as we talked about, is very imaginative and very creative, so he's inherently more willing to believe that this thing is true. His mental state is more susceptible to being able to believe that and not rationalizing anything, right? And the second reason is that Calvin's just a kid, okay? If some kid comes talking to you about ridiculous things, you're assuming he's just, you know, LARPing or whatever, right? You're not going to take him seriously. And that's the whole point, because we see that the perceptive reality warping has limits, because we see the physical effects of Hobbes. Other people that aren't Calvin see these effects. So it's not limitless. It seems to break down at a certain point. So if this machinery is going to permit Hobbes to talk to anyone, it would be with someone who is not going to put additional stressors on the reality warping. Because if some like normal adult saw this, they would be freaking out and they'd be trying to like call a bunch of attention to it, which could significantly stress the perceptive warping machinery. Okay, so I think that's why Calvin and Calvin alone is able to perceive Hobbes as real. In theory, perhaps other people could do it if they trained themselves or if they weren't as much of a perceptive warping threat, a threat to the machinery. And so, lastly, we have to answer is what the hell's going on with the rest of Calvin's imagination? It's an interesting detail that Hobbes almost always, seems to perceive Calvin's imagination also as real. So Calvin and Hobbes both see whatever they're imagining as something real. Now, at lower levels, this can probably just be rationalized as them, just playing. But some of those stories are pretty damn hard to justify. Let's see. The transmogrifier can probably be justified as just purely imaginative. The duplicates cannot be justified as purely imaginative. Those have an element of reality to them. The time machine can be justified as purely imaginative, I think. The aliens, Galaxoid and Nebular, can be justified as just purely imaginative. But the snow goons also were probably real. So I'm not fully sure what's going on here, but my working theory is that prolonged exposure to Hobbes, who is an entity from beyond the universe, even to Hobbes himself, if without being, shielded like other people normally are, produces very powerful hallucinations and can even spawn entities. But these entities are pretty limited in their ability. Like, they cannot interfere with other people's versions of reality, which is why the snow goons and the duplicates were always positioned in ways that never interfered with, anyone who's not Calvin and Hobbes' vision of reality. So, I mean, that theory still is lacking a little bit, because, like, why does that happen? Okay, like, what about the physics of this weird stuff causes things to go that way? So that still needs to be answered. But overall, I think we've sealed this issue pretty tightly, and I think we've punched through to the truth of what's going on here. Also, Watterson contradicted the first comic strip later, but he's just salty that we've broken through the truth, okay? He just added that later in to contradict things. But we're not going to let him do that, okay? We're going to seize the truth, okay? We are going to reject his attempts to reject clarity, okay? And we will spill this out in all its logical glory. I'm so euphoric right now. All right? Okay, now I'm just going to explain how I think this works with the third model. So basically, Hobbes is a real thing. He's walking around, and Calvin can see him for what he is, but he manipulates everyone's sight, hearing, and touch, so that, they can't hear him, mostly, they can't see him, they'll see the plush animal, and if they go to touch it, they'll touch the plush animal. But there's some kind of like reality pathfinding going on here, too, because if you see, sometimes Calvin's mother brings Hobbes back home from the bus stop, whereas, Hobbes himself probably just physically walked back. So there's some kind of like forecasting going on where it'll predict other people's mental states, or like carve out like a logical path for them to follow to make sense of Hobbes' movements, if that makes sense. So if Hobbes like throws a rock into a stream or something, and somebody else is, physically looking there, ideally it would be best if he did it when nobody was looking, but if he did do it when someone was looking, then it would come up with some other excuse. It would just appear like the rock fell by itself, or if it was thrown in a way that clearly couldn't, it might manifest, some other excuse in that person for why that thing happened.